We're going to give folks just maybe another minute, and then we'll do some intro stuff, and then we'll start the presentations.
Okay, Dan, we're recording.
All right, so Cello's got us recording. Very good. Well, I'll go ahead and get us started then. Good morning, everybody. My name's Dan Ott. I have had the opportunity to help kick off, welcome, facilitate this awesome group of UAIM, soon to be WISE utility partners. So glad to be here on a Monday morning, and especially so it's 9:30 here Central Time, and of course 10:30 East Coast, but our West Coast folks, they're up early at 7:30 on a Monday morning. So shout out to you guys for waking up early for this. We're just doing a brief intro this morning for those of you who haven't been on these calls specifically that we invited in from the broader UAIM group, and plus we're recording this to share more broadly. This is the focus area on the CIP planning, business case evaluation, and CIP delivery improvement area or improvement initiatives, leveraging the use of business process modeling and the methodology developed through UAIM. So that's who we are. If you're in the wrong place, that's okay. Stay. I think you might learn a few things along the way. We're going to share with you this morning two case study initiatives, some presentations of two different utilities, the things that they've been working on for this year 2 UAIM project. And last session on April 26th, we did two presentations and a little bit of feedback in a workshop on April 26th. And I actually posted that in the chat. So there's a link to that video that we recorded from April 26th, and just want to give a shout out to DC Water, Kathleen and Getachew, as well as Louisville MSD. It was Zanetta and Tracy that presented for Louisville. And Zanetta surprised us with a little gift. She shared, it was Kentucky Derby week there. And so she decided to get a little gift, and Darren, who's on the call today, was the benefactor. So she did a little drawing, and you can see a big smile on his face. He got a big Take the Kentucky deal out of this. So anyway, I thought that was really fun as a part of last week's workshop. So this group's having some fun. It's good.
Zonetta, you're raising the bar.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So yeah, all right, good. Zanetta jumped on. So awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is the agenda for today. We just did the welcome. Then we're going to have Jason Yu from Metro Vancouver and Jeff Carmichael as well as part of that team sharing the initiative they worked on, and then I'll be presenting a little bit, at least in the second half. We've got a two-part presentation from KC Water. We got Scott Parker on the line who's going to kick us off with that, and then we'll follow up with actually some feedback. We're going to do some surveys to look towards the future. Like I say, we're transitioning from UAIM to WISE as the future name of this what we call a movement, this group of utility partners that continues to work towards improvement together. So we'll have a little bit of time for that. Feedback we got last session was we had a lot of great content, but we ran out of time for any question and answer. So we might have a little bit of flexibility towards the end to be able to do question and answer if folks are like, hey, I really want to have some dialogue on that, or I really want to ask a question. And as we go through, post your questions in the chat if you can. If you're not, email them to Cello, and he can help kind of regulate for us on that. So, all right, I got 6 after. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Jason. Go ahead and share your screen, Jason, and you've got the floor.
Okay, thank you so much for that intro, Dan. Yes, despite being 7:30, I woke up an hour ago, just raring to go to present to you guys. So yeah, there you go. You can see my screen share. It's working?
Yes. You're good.
Yes. Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity to present. Like Dan mentioned, my name is Jason Yu, and I'm an assistant project engineer here Metro Vancouver on the West Coast and in Canada. I'll be running through the majority of the slides, but Jeff Carmichael, it seems he's also here, and he'll jump in and he can chime in where I maybe create some gaps. Yeah, Jeff, I don't know if you want to say hi.
Good morning, everyone. I'll chime in maybe now and then, but this is Jason's baby. He's done a fantastic job with it.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And so what I'll be presenting today is, yes, this project that I've been sort of chipping away at for the past really 3 years, but it kind of really got the ball roll, or kind of started crystallizing into some formal recommendations about a year ago, and we incorporated some of these, good UAIM principles. And what we'll be calling it is the streamlining of small projects, quote unquote, small projects in the planning and delivery at Metro Vancouver. So let me see. So for the agenda today, I'll quickly run through the context of the situation, talk about the observations I made, some analysis, as well as the recommendations of how the proposal that we basically took to the general manager on how to improve our processes at Metro Vancouver. So for some context, I'll really quickly start the high level of the year 1 CIP planning and delivery, the business process model that was developed within UAIM together collaboratively among this group. So here's the 7-stage gate that you guys saw in the, if you attended the last workshop, you saw. And so where we're situated today is what we're going to be looking at is something called the minor capital budget. These come into the form of minor capital requests, or MCRs. So I'll be using this MCR acronym a lot. And there are really 2 purposes for an MCR. One is to define work that's over this 250K threshold, or to deliver the entirety of a work if it's under 250, so smaller. So to demonstrate what that looks like on the diagram. So this is purpose 1. So this is defining the work greater than 250. So I drew this red box that takes it from stage 0 all the way up to stage 3. Stage 3 being the conceptual design. So you can a project manager might request $250,000 worth of work to fuel some sort of study, some sort of options analysis, some scope definition, and then at the end of that study, they can check in with the overall process and basically be like, does this warrant some sort of major capital funding? And that's that threshold piece. And this was really what started our investigation into this issue. Is for the longest time, we had these green box projects, these major capital over 250. The problem is they would land on our plan in the pre-detailed design phase, and it wasn't properly scoped out. So the construction dollars, maybe it started as a $5 million project, but then it just kept on ballooning, 10, 20, $30 million. And it was a huge challenge. And, we just had to keep on going back to our board to be like, look, we need more money. And so that's when collectively we're like, this needs to stop. We need to better scope out our projects from the beginning, take it through gates 0 to 3 first before we try to attempt this green box, this major capital. So that was very much the driving force behind us doing this investigation and really coming to UAIM to better get some processes around, how can we define these projects. So that's the red-green box. And then the second purpose that I alluded to was, if the whole project is less than 250K, if it's a simple like-for-like valve replacement, or, we just need to install a new hatch. If we already know the scope, honestly, let's just do the whole thing under one request. And so you can now see the red box is extended to the end of the 7 stage gates. So that gives you kind of a sense of the context as to where these MCRs fit into the process. Sometimes they're studies, sometimes they're delivering the whole thing. So now looking at historical performance of this budget, within Metro Vancouver, we're both a water and wastewater utility. So on the top, the red graph is sort of the historical performance for the last 5 years. The dotted line is our budget, and the solid line is our actuals. So as you can see, we're pretty consistently underspent, about 60%. On the water side, we do a little bit better, but there is still some gaps. So this was another challenge that we experienced is, why are we not using our budget to its full extent? And there were some inefficiencies there. So yeah, it's just some more context as to what we were exploring. To give you a picture of the cycle, the process within Metro Vancouver of how this flows, typically it starts in the January timeframe, and we give a deadline to the project managers of about April. So please submit all your requests by April, at which point we'll move to the red arrow, we'll review the needs, and then we'll review those needs for a month or so, pass it over to senior management. They have a chance to take a kick at it, and that's really when all the different budgets, not just the minor capital, the operating, the capital, the major capital, they all come together, and senior management churns it eventually before providing it to the board in October. And then that MCR that was submitted in the green arrow can finally get started in January of 2021. And that's that blue arrow down at the bottom. That's just kind of like a flow of it, and this is what we would communicate out, and this is the process that we followed for at least 10 years or 5 years, if not longer than that. But the problem is we started in drawing out that diagram, we realized it was too limited to look at it just in isolation of a 1-year cycle. And this was really the benefit of the business process modeling, is you start drawing things out and you realize, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't really make sense, or this doesn't really match reality. And the thing that we were noticing is, these MCRs, they happen on a 1-year churn, but the 1 year kind of stacks on top of each other. So I'll give you this example. Within 2019, the arrows that you have, it's the same cycle that I shown on the previous slide. You flow through green, red, gray, orange to start in blue. But the problem is and I'm sure you guys all know, blue is always a little bit more complicated than you're hoping. And so what should have been done in 1 year, and that's sort of the constraint that that the corporation has placed on these MCR projects, is they're supposed to be done within a year. The constraint that was placed, it always bleeds a little bit. Yeah, you hire the contractor late, you run into a change order, it takes some time to get approvals. So what's now 12 months becomes 16 months. The problem with that is each January, you're gathering and submitting new needs. So you really don't know if that blue project from the previous year is going to finish when you're gathering the new ones for the next year. And so you just have to assume that they are going to finish because you don't really have any other information. But so what you're hoping for is, each year the blue arrow starts cleanly in January. But we're competing for the same resources. And so what happens is when the project from the previous year bleeds over and carries forward, it pushes the current year project even further. I'm sure I don't need to explain this to you guys. It's pretty common, and this was something that we knew anecdotally was happening. within our organization, but really it wasn't until we started mapping it out, we started collecting the data, that we saw the extent and the severity of the issue. And that's when we realized, oh shoot, we need to change something here. So that's, yeah, the arrow being pushed. And then as you can imagine, it just gets worse and worse every year. As you know, we keep on gathering new projects, but we never have enough time to finish them. And so what that turns into is this growing backlog and really an inefficient mobilization. So already in the base process, there's kind of an 8-month gap between submitting your MCR and getting it started. You know, an 8-month gap just by default between the green arrow and the blue arrow. But now with this this carry forward shuffling effect, that 8-month, again, like I said, becomes a 16th month, becomes a 24-month, and now you get into problems where the person who originally submitted the project, by the time it gets started, they forgot what the project was all about. They're like, oh, you know, I'm just submitting my budget request now, and I'll figure out when we get closer to the date. But then that person retires, that person finds a new job, that person, you know, gets a new role, a whole variety of issues, and the mobilization just becomes really, really inefficient. I realize I've been talking for a bit. I don't know, Jeff, if there's anything you want to chime in on.
I think you're catching the main point. Maybe one thing to emphasize would be that the pre-work that we have found that's necessary to better scope major projects is really quite distinct from what are truly minor works. Yeah, we're trying to bundle things into a common package that will handle all that smaller amounts of money. And the other thing I maybe would be worth emphasizing is 250K is not enough. And so we ran into problems there where not only the backlogs that Jason's described, but even just what's small, we end up seeing people bundle 2-3 packages together and into what effectively would be a small package over 3 years because of the constraints we put on that. And that's another thing Jason's flagged. So it's a great combination, and it's hard to figure out what the best approach is to morph from something into something new. I think this is a great strategy.
Right. No, yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for the reminder, Jeff. That 250K limit is another constraint that our project managers run up against, and it was really a limit that was set, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago before inflation and, you know, the rising price of living, and we get into this situation of like it's a death by 1,000 cuts where people have to, you know, submit 3 or 4 of these in parallel in order to sort of game the system, but just finish the work that they need to do. So yeah, that's another situation as to how inefficient this process has become over time. So yeah, thanks for adding that note, Jeff. This is kind of the graphical view of the issue, but next I'll show the data view. Just kind of what we meant about the extent of the issue. So there's a lot going on in this slide, but I'll do my best to decode it. So the first thing I'll draw your attention to is this purple line, both in the bar graph and in the table. These are kind of annual undefined work. And this is just kind of like some overhead really that we have to skim off the top. So we might say it's a $11 million budget. This is for the water side. It's $11 million budget, but really $2.5 million of that is for like cross charges for our drafting and our survey and our inspection. So that's just work that continues all the time. The next bar is the red bar, and the red bar is really the bulk of the MCR, and so this takes up 55% of the spending, and there are 66 of these active MCR projects that are in the red, and you'll see they spent about $4.4 million in actuals, but you'll notice there are no budgets. So this is the situation where I was alluding to earlier, where the budget was actually from a prior year. So maybe it was a project initiated in 2019 or even 2018, but it's still continuing to spend against it. Just because it ran out of time in previous years. So, you know, the majority of our budget is taken up by this red block. And really, it's this small, narrow band bar, the green. There are only 20 projects there, but those are the ones that truly in earnest were budgeted for that year. You can see there's about 4 million budgeted, 3.7 million budgeted, and only 1 million spent against those. So, going back to thinking back to the previous slide, that's that gap that keeps on growing each and every year. And then those are the colored items in the table. The other blue items, there are projects, that's our backlog. That's what makes up our backlog. These are items that you can see $5 million worth of work was budgeted for 2020, but never got started. You know, you didn't spend a single dime against them in 2020, and so they have to carry forward into 2021. There's 29 of those projects, and then we get into the issue of adding on new projects. So this is that line. Sorry, I'll annotate. Maybe it's better. Okay, here we go. It's this budget. So these are new projects that are added on to this portfolio, and you know, this 29, this 30, they're all competing for the same resources and the same money. And so that's what this illustrates. We have 29 projects that were submitted in April of 2019, so that was 24 months ago. And we have another 42 projects that are already waiting 12 months. And then how many new projects are going to be submitted this April? So I think our deadline was, 2 weeks ago. And I think we received 80 MCRs. So you can see we have about a backlog of, if this is 80, we're going to have a backlog of 140 MCRs that need to start, but then we only start 20 new ones each year. So even if we don't accept any new MCRs for the next like 5-6 years, we're still going to be chipping away at this same backlog. And that really speaks to, maybe we're under-resourced. This is what we need to communicate to our managers.
And under-resourced, just to be clear, means we don't have enough staff.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. So that's that. With that, the observations that we made, here are some recommendations on how we'd like to change it. Is just restructuring the approvals and the intake of the MCRs. So what we've done is we've separated out the program management aspect from the budget approval. So the thing that we noticed was, you know, every single year, despite how many projects we have, you know, despite our 140 MCRs in our backlog, we only get approved for the same amount. We only get approved for, about 8 million on the liquid waste side and about 11 million on the water side. So it really kind of speaks to maybe the process that we go through to prepare our budgets is the senior management's like, just increase 2% every year. We're like, okay, but our need list is growing longer and longer. We need to hire new staff. So why are we jumping through all these hoops to try to define what this list is going to look like? Just approve the bucket and we'll better manage it. And we'll better manage it by having these quarterly meetings. So instead of just once a year, this red group and division managers sit in this red group. They'll meet on a more ongoing basis, and they can better mobilize and better delegate when these MCRs should start. And And hopefully we can get some buy-in from finance and our senior management to have some policy clarity on this, what these MCRs should be just taking 1 year. Is it okay to go over that? And what about the 250K limit? Another benefit from moving to this program management approach is you can collect MCRs throughout the year. So that's this green arrow. It doesn't need to be we don't need to bottleneck it in April every year. And all those new green requests that come in can get prioritized against a backlog, the existing backlog. And this is where we have better information on justifying new staff. And then the last slide here is what I was alluding to. The gap between the red arrow and the blue arrow can be much smaller once the red group reviews it and they're like, yes, we're ready to go, let's start, this is urgent. We don't need to now wait for board approval or budget approval. We have this bucket to play with, and we'll just go ahead and spend it. Yeah, I believe that's the last slide. So Jeff, I don't know, any other things you want to highlight that maybe I missed?
I think that's a great overview. Maybe the only thing to emphasize would be that there were several different challenges present here: too small a budget, too insufficient staff, and a time process that wasn't working. So I think this proposal is trying to get at a bunch of those different pieces, but more from what we have. It'd be interesting to hear what some of the rest of you have done in this same respect, whether you started with a clean sheet or tried to work from what you have. So I think that's an interesting tension that's present in many of these situations. Yeah, great job, Jason.
Okay, no, yeah, thanks for those comments, Jeff. Yeah, there's the slides. So I can stop sharing my screen if I figure out how to do that. Yeah. Dan, do you want to do questions now, or should we move forward?
Yeah, I think we've got a few minutes. We got about 5 more minutes. So you did a great job with that. So I think Jenny's raising her hand. Go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you, Jason and Jeff. This was very familiar territory for Tacoma Water, so I appreciate it. I'm curious about your MCR intake process or the platform that you're using. We heard from Baltimore that they have a GIS-based intake platform. So what's your intake process? Is it a Word document? Is it a system? Kind of what does it look like when an MCR request comes in?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jenny. It is currently all Excel based. So we have a Excel template that's locked down, so you can't insert new cells and rows and whatnot. And then I have a macro that basically it just downloads I think we get about 150 of them each year between water and liquid waste. So the macro ensures that, given that the version of the form is the same, we can pull it all across. Of course, being Excel, there are some interesting challenges. One was my mistake this year, where I released 2 versions of the form, and then I miscommunicated what each group should use which form. So I think I got, again, 150 of them, and 100 were using one version of the form, and then 50, and then I had to make 2 macros, and it was a whole thing. Not perfect, but pretty good for what we need to do, and we are moving to a more corporate system. We just moved to this corporate system last year for our major capital. So if you remember that green box is now, there's a professional software to uptake those, and hopefully in the next few years we can move the MCRs to that as well. But I mean, Excel version hasn't been perfect, but for the last 5 years, it does what it needs to do.
Very good. Okay, I see Kathleen has her virtual hand raised. Go ahead, Kathleen. Is she
You're
unmuted?
muted, Kathleen.
Have you guys started your quarterly meetings already?
Yes, we have. We started them maybe April of last year, so we've had about six of them now. Is that 5 or 6? Well, we kind of doubled up some of them because we had more things to talk about. But yeah, it's
Great.
going good. Yeah, I would
Great.
say so.
Then the other question I have is on the backlog, because again, a lot of this sounds very familiar. I think you've got a good solution. So if you have 120 projects and you only have budget for 20, or did I hear that right?
Well, we technically have usually the issue isn't money, it's resources and staff time. So we have the money, like you saw, we were underspent. The issue is we just don't have the people to spend it.
Okay, so do projects leapfrog? Like, would you have something that comes in 21 that happens before something that came in 19? And it's just one more complication if you can't keep up, right? That you're always shuffling the deck.
Yes, absolutely. Always shuffling the deck. Jeff and I worked on something this January that we tried to come up with a better prioritization template. So historically, those 80 MCRs that come in new each year, they're only prioritized A or B. And so of course everyone just submits an A, and then we have just a whole list of A's, and we're like, we have no idea what to do with these.
Yes.
So
Everything's important.
We tried to take a risk-based prioritization similar to what we saw with Baltimore, and you get points based on questions you answer, and like, is this a maintenance issue? Is this a growth issue? And then based on that, it'll hopefully spit up a benefit to the utility that's independent of year and when it was submitted. And so you can better facilitate those conversations. But yeah, it's also a work in progress.
The challenge there, I think, Kathleen, is that you need a screening level for that. People sometimes game the system. It's been like that for 15 years. And so someone has to check and go, no, you've said, you've ticked all the risk boxes. It's not. And
Sure.
that becomes the challenge. That takes time, and it takes someone familiar enough with the projects to do so. Right? So there are ways to improve that, but it's messy. People are messy.
Well, and I do think that everything really is an A at some point, right? It all needs to be done. Nothing is, you're not doing anything arbitrary just because Jason wants his own thing. Anyway, great job, guys. This is really good.
Yeah, great job. So here we are. We're at 10:05. So if anybody has any other questions, feel free to throw it in the chat, and Jason, keep an eye on that. And if you want to chat it up during the next presentation, feel free. But we'll go ahead and transition. And next up is KC Water. We've got Scott Parker, our asset manager, and myself. We're going to do a two-part presentation and see if we can squeeze in two presentations in 30 minutes here. So I'll turn it over to Scott and take it away.
All right. Thanks so much, Dan. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Enjoyed the first presentation quite a lot, Jason. I think there's going to be some things that are similar between the two. So Dan's going to run the presentation. So everyone, if there's any technical difficulties, please put that in Dan's complaint box. It has nothing to do with my presentation. I just want everybody to start the conversation out with that. So, okay. So really two things in our presentation today. We're going to talk about our planning process, our BCE improvements that we made this year, and then the delivery roadmap. And we took on a lot this year, and you'll see that here in just a moment. Go ahead, Dan. A little bit about us first. We are a combined water, wastewater, and stormwater public utility. We're a department of the city of Kansas City. We have about a $440 million operating revenue budget. Over 850 employees at any one time. And we have overall, we have 170,000 direct accounts, plus we serve, so our total population serves about 700,000 total, put everything together. Go ahead, Dan, you can go to the next slide. I'm the asset manager, so obviously this is much more interesting to me, is the number of assets we actually manage in our portfolio. You can see we have one treatment plant for the whole city. It's rated at about 250 MGD, 2,800 miles of water mains. We have 2,500 miles of sewer. We have combined sewers as well as sanitary sewers. We're one of those great places. We're under a consent decree as a result of that drastically affects our capital program. We have 630 miles of storm, and we have 660 green infrastructure assets, which is a newer asset type that's continuing to build. It's actually a part of our decree, so that makes things even a little bit more interesting. You can go on to the next slide, Dan. An interesting thing also about us is we have a very large service area, 318 square miles. We only have about 500,000 people, though, within the city limits. Kansas City is very weird. It's an urban environment, a suburban environment, and a rural environment kind of all tied together. This is something we always talk about. You could take San Francisco, Miami, Philadelphia, and Boston, throw them all and attach them together, and they would be less than our service area. And we only have about 14% of their population. So that makes for very challenging things when you're talking about capital intensive delivery of service like utilities. And that makes us a little bit special. So, okay, go ahead, Dan. So the group that really addressed the two issues that you're going to see today is our project team. I think a lot of you on the call know at least three of us, obviously myself, Dan, and then Lisa Pleasure, who is our senior financial analyst. She is involved in our capital planning program. And then Zach Monroe, who some of you who's been on this call, I know. I think hopefully most of you know him as well, but he's our scheduling specialist. All four of us kind of played a role in this process. And I kind of want to begin, you can go ahead to the next slide, Dan. Where this really got going, quite frankly, at least on this part one, is actually it's related to a conversation that Cello and I had last year at the end of the basically right before the world ended out in California at the UMC conference, where we had really started finalizing the stage gating process and really the best practice as part of the UAIM group. And the question was, could we go back to our own home and really implement a lot of this stuff and do it in 1 year? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Go ahead, Dan, you can go to the next slide. So this was the model that we use. Everybody's familiar with this. I just wanted to reiterate, sort of document the current conditions, items for improvement, so on and so forth. Everybody's familiar with us. I just wanted to let you all know this is sort of the approach we took. You can go to the next slide, Dan. So we essentially set out taking that model and we developed 4 goals for our CIP planning and BCE initiative. As is process planning, compare our process to the model developed as part of the UAIM research project year 1. Develop a robust lessons learned list to share with other folks who might be interested in doing this and doing it in the time frame we were trying to do it. And then share a list of new processes and tools that we developed as we went through the implementation of the process. And that's kind of what the presentation today is going to speak to. So you can go to the next slide, Dan. So I want to go through the first part of my presentation is going to be sort of what we consider to be successful strategies that we actually were able to accomplish using this model in 1 year. So get used to that definition. You'll have to forgive me, I'm from the South. The way I pronounce strategy is somewhere between the actual correct way and what you see on the slide, I guess. So anyway, so in 1 year, we deconstructed and reconstructed, documented, and rebuilt our entire CIP process utilizing WS methodologies and then with a cross-functional CIP planning team. We also redid our BCE process and reconceptualized it. Go ahead to the next slide, Dan. We also codified and put together well-defined project scopes. That's something we'd had trouble with for years. We also standardized what we call the rules for the business case evaluation. What is a business case evaluation in KC Water? And we really landed on, I think, some things that work well for us. You can go to the next slide, Dan. We also took our CIP program, which had been a very insular process, and we exposed it both to the folks who were involved to a lot of different best practice capital planning methodologies, and we brought a whole new group of stakeholders into the mix. So we were very excited about kind of where that landed. So I guess the point is we went through the process and I think we landed, go ahead to the next slide, Dan. We felt like we had a lot of success in that we delivered our $700 million water and $1.8 million wastewater, $1.8 billion wastewater CIP from various perspectives, and it aligns with our utilities 10-year financial plan. So that's an accomplishment. I want to mention one other thing. Just to make things a little more difficult, we did the whole thing virtually. So the whole process was virtual. There was not one in-person meeting. So I think that speaks somewhat to the commitment of the folks involved, but also to the robustness of the methodology, the planning methodology. You can go to the next slide, Dan. So as everybody knows, this is the BPMN model using the Signavio software. And I mean, great. This was a really interesting tool. Helped us a lot. This is sort of our process outlined in 3 different stages. But the goal and kind of what I talked to Cello about is like, this is great, but how do we make this real, right? And so what we're going to talk about next is how we made it real. So we're going to show what we did sort of through a couple of different windows here, but mostly through these tools that we developed. So we built a CIP planning schedule, utilizing and our work breakdown structures using the BPMN methodology. We created these new document management tools that I'm going to speak to. We developed a CIP quarterly stakeholder team and a bond modeling tool, which is something that we use for our financials. Mind you, all of this was done this year. So this is all 1 year. What you're seeing today is done in 1 year. Go ahead, Dan, to the next slide. I'm hoping you can go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, go back. I'm ready to go to the tool. Sorry. Okay. So what you see here is a tool. This is a portfolio document in Adobe Acrobat, and it's a one-stop shop for all the CIP tools. You can sort of see what it is. It's very, very simple to do. It has all of our kind of significant documents, which are aligned in folders on the left. One of the most important is our schedule. Go ahead, Dan, if you click on that guy. So this is our CIP schedule. It was done in Microsoft Project. I don't know what that's doing there. There we go. Okay, so this is our attempt to make this real, right? And instead of looking at boxes tied together on a BPM model, which is a fine way of doing it, this is sort of looking at it from a different perspective. You'll notice that the schedule is built with the stages that are outlined in the BPMN model, adjusted for KC Water terminology, stage 0, 1, 2. You can go ahead, Dan, and expand. So if you look at stage 1, it's going to point out a few things that might be of interest to those folks who are interested in this. So we broke up our CIP planning into sort of phases. So the stages have phases to them, right? So there are financial baselines that we have to do before we really do anything else. There are also new process baselines, meaning how do you evaluate new needs for projects, risk ranking of projects, that type of methodology. The other thing that's pretty interesting about this tool, Dan, would you go to row 6 there? I just want to show you kind of what this does. This is an education as well as a scheduling tool for us. So if you hover over the notes, as you see Dan is, if you're wondering what row 6 determine allowances for O&M budget is, you can actually note that anybody that looks at it can say, well, what is this? Well, this is the amount of cash that's programmed to the operating budget for capital project delivery. We have two budgets that we use for capital. One is essentially an operating cash capital, sort of to Jason's point, that 250,000, the minor project side. And then we have our overall debt finance CIP as well. So this is just a really easy way for people to see what that means and what we have to do as we go through that process. Dan, would you go down to stage 1 there and expand that guy? As you get into it, then we got into our stage 1, which is our actual planning, production, and distribution process. And again, I just kind of want to show you a couple of artifacts and examples that we built into this. Would you go to row 20 there, Dan? So the note, if you can double click on that, back to it. So this is actually the this is a pop-up, and we populated this with what that particular row means. So create BCEs, and you can click on the document if you would, Dan. It attaches to the actual. So this is the actual BCE form that we use. Folks from Tacoma will recognize this guy, I think, it's very similar. I did do some adjustment for it, but if anybody needed to go get the BCE, it's right here. It's all linked up. you know what to do with it. Here's what we built. So that's sort of a real, that was a huge step for us. It's a communication tool we use. You can get out of the this now, Dan, and we can go back to the. So if you go back over here, I just wanted to show you all a couple of the ways we approach the BCEs this year. Would you go to the water BCEs folder there, Dan? Thank you. Open up that first project. So essentially our BCEs were kind of twofold. We wanted to see it, like how malleable it was to really build these, and meaning take it down to the most simple project and then the most robust project, right? Even our programs. So this particular BC here is a very, very simple one. We made the decision to build project scopes for all of the projects that are in the CIP for this fiscal year. And so what this one does is, if you just scroll down a little bit, Dan, it's got very rudimentary information. This project happened to be already in the design process, so it was already set up for approval. But it does give you a little bit of understanding of what the project overview is, its description, and then, you know, if we did any alternatives analysis, what will we do? Well, in this case, there was no do nothing because the project was already being designed. So it was already built out. So it's a very, very simple, but again, it gives us information that we didn't have before. It's codified in a form. The other end of the spectrum, if you'll go to the fourth, yeah, that one right there. Yep. So this is our water main replacement program, BCE. This is a $30 million a year investment that we make in the rehabilitation of our water main replacement throughout the city. So same thing, same format. Go ahead, Dan. But you'll notice lots more information around this, right? Around the program itself, around what we're going to do. This one has no alternatives really analysis. We're going to do this every year, but what this allowed us to do is look at it, see, are we doing it the right way? And the final thing I wanted to mention is this was our hook. This was our quantitative hook that we built into our BCE. This is a rubric that we actually use first for IT, believe it or not, projects in the department, and I've used it in other places as well. But what it did was it gave us a look at what does the project manager, the real project manager, where do they think this falls as it relates to the importance to these criteria that you see here on the screen. And then you sum the scores at the bottom, and then go ahead, Dan, go down to the bottom. And then this is sort of what the scores mean, right? So the top tier is it's going to be included in this year's CIP on down the line as it relates to the delivery of the project. Now, this was not, just because the project manager rated it this, it doesn't mean that we put it in the CIP for this year. But it gave the committee a real look at sort of how they valued it, not just from the narrative, but also from some sort of criteria that's around to a quantitative hook, you might say. And then the ultimate recommendation that fell. I'll say this, what was really interesting, you can get out of this, Dan, through this process was that we really got great dialogue around this. And from the dialogue, it was weird. The quantitative scores, the dialogue, and the ultimate decision all kind of coalesced, even though it wasn't super, we didn't, depend a lot on the quantitative. But we did have it, and it was interesting for us. Then the only other thing I guess I could show you, if you would go to the CIP documents file there, Dan. Yeah. So this is the CIP itself, the actual CIP. And all of the information that sort of it goes into it. So this is a summary page. I'm really showing you this just to show that this particular format, you can put this in a PDF, or you can actually open it in its native format. If you see up there it says open document, I'm not going to have you do that. It's on the upper right hand corner. But would you go to that PDF, the Water CIP FY22 PDF there, Dan? So this was the other thing that came out of the process. This is sort of our at a glance document. So if you don't want to look at all the BCEs, if you don't want to look at the Excel spreadsheet, you can just grab this and we can take it around. We can give it to council people. We can give it to PMs. We can give it, and they've been distributed widely kind of across the board. Again, it's really, really helpful, very easy to understand. And it really gave us a lot of daylighting into the process, which I think helps us in the end. Okay, very good. So that's sort of how we built our BP, utilizing the UAIM stuff and then making it real, sort of making it real across the department. There's one other thing I would like to show. Dan, would you show the bond modeling tool really quick? Yeah. So we have had issues, sort of to Jason's point, where we would plan out a project list, sell a bond, and then the projects wouldn't be delivered, right? And this has been a problem we've had in the department for years. Well, through the BPM model, through the CIP planning process this year, we decided we were going to change that. We're going to build this, what's called a bond modeling tool. So we sold a water bond. This happens to be related to a bond. And it sort of steps you through the stages. So the first tab here is, hey, we sold a $79 million bond. The project list in column C there, that was the projects and the amounts of those in the CIP that were planned for the bond itself. Column F is the percentages, the percentage spend across the board for each project in the 3-year arbitrage window. If you go to the next tab there, Dan, then you get into the actual. So what this is the actual delivery of projects around the bond, cash flowed out over the entire arbitrage timeframe, so in 3 years. So column C is the actual projects that were delivered. Anything that's in yellow was as an actualized cost. And then anything that's not in yellow, an amount not in yellow, to go, you're right, Dan, is the anticipated value, the anticipated cost. You roll this up, go to the next tab, yeah. So this is the result. The result is the red line there is related to the left axis, and that's what I had actually planned for the spend on the bond sale. The brown line across the solid brown line is what we got to get to meet arbitrage, right? And then the yellow line is how we're actually performing right now. So what you can see sort of at a glance is we're way behind what we had scheduled already. And then the way this is designed is the bar chart is related to the right axis, and that's the spending, the anticipated spend month over month, right? So it tells us sort of where we're going and where we're having issues on a month over month basis. We use this for that CIP planning and team. It absolutely gives us information that we never had before. So again, came out of the CIP planning process this year, really, really valuable for us. Okay, Dan. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Okay, I have written a case study that kind of walks us through this. I am not going to go through all these lessons learned right now. I think there are a couple of them that I really just want to point out. One of them is in the beginning, I think one thing we really we struggled with, but we finally got through is we had to be real honest where our weaknesses and strengths lied, right? We were pretty good on the financials, really terrible on the outlining of the project scopes, how they fit into the overall strategy of the department, so on and so forth. And then the third point there, it's really important to know what you should do. Know the UAIM process, right? Know the 7 stage gates, know all of that, and then come to grips with what your organization can do given its resources and willingness. Where you hold that expectations really helps to drive where you're ultimately going to end up, I think. Go ahead to the next slide, Dan. A couple of other ones I'd like to mention here. One of them is second bullet point. So designating a CIP planning manager to lead, inform, and guide to ensure the process works is pretty critical. We found that to be pretty critical. I'm sure everybody has a person that does this, but the thing that I think was really beneficial for us, I'd like to mention with this is, that was me, and I did have the authority to kind of call out problematic practice or problematic arguments made by folks who were, advocating for projects, and that gave me a lot. That made the process, I think, go in a lot more uniform and smooth way. So there has to be some empowerment with that. Go ahead, Dan. You can go to the next slide. I think I want to end up, and I don't know why this slide is off. For some reason, all my slides look different on my screen than what I'm seeing here in the presentation. But a couple of other things about BCEs. They're incredibly powerful, but if they're only understood by the widest range of people, and there has to be some benefit. If you can't tell them what the benefit is, forget it. All of our best practice, all of the hard work we put in as a group out in California and in Portland and other places, it really falls apart kind of on that point if we're not able to do that. I think something that's interesting for us, there's actually around the last 3 points. One is we expect that our form will become more quantitative. We'll actually have more information, more data to add, but I don't think if that will change our decision-making process. And the reason is because nobody in our group has the time to really do a deep quantitative dive beyond a certain point as it relates to the actual decision-making. One thing that we noted was related to the last point that for some reason you can't see is outcomes aren't predestined from any type of information. What was weird is we had projects that had a lot more quantitative information, projects that had a lot less. Typically speaking, they almost always landed as far as the priority ranking in the same spot. We didn't see hardly any movement in that. Largely because the richness of the BCE itself allowed us to get to those more analytical questions amongst the people who were in the stakeholder group. So we had great dialogue. And if somebody didn't have enough information, it did not take long for someone to call out and say, there's not enough information on this, let's move on, right? So you can get there multiple ways. It goes back to what you can do versus what you should do. And I think that, having that understanding really helped us. I guess I'll summarize by saying this final point. Cello, congratulations. The process can be done. It can work. It works really well in the sense of having the structure, having the right people on the bus, and really having those touch points and those artifacts that we could pull from. We were able to do this, and we were able to do it in a way that was really incredibly beneficial for our department. And we were very excited about the results. That's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
All right, great job, Scott. So yeah, I'm going to call an audible and say, yeah, I see Jeff's got his hands up. Let's go ahead and get at least a couple of questions in here, and then we'll move to part 2, and I can be flexible on my portion of the presentation. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks, Dan. It was great, Scott. Really exciting to see. I'm curious how in the process you guys are doing this. You're tracking changing information. Is your documentation dynamic? Do you overwrite old material? Do you create logs as you go? I know that's been a real challenge for us.
Yes, we do. I have the way the form is built, Jeff. I have multiple. I guess there's a lot. What I showed you was sort of a dead PDF, but there's a lot of dynamicism built into the forms themselves, such that we can easily change and update almost anything, or really everything in the form itself. So yes, the answer to that is yes. I will tell you, it didn't start out that way. In other words, I kind of encountered the same problem that you're speaking to in your question. It was like, wait a minute, this thing was this now it's that, right? So I just went back into the forms, and because they're so simple, I was able to really easily build that dynamicism in without hardly any problem. It took me, a day or whatever to do it. And the other thing too is like through the schedule and stuff. We updated that schedule as we went along in the process to see how we were tracking. I cannot emphasize enough the power and the importance of that planning step, right? It kept us on track the whole time. Also, it was really great for me to go to our leadership team and say, hey, do you realize how complex the CIP process really is? They had no idea. And so when I threw up that schedule that had, 65 steps in it, thereabout, right? And remember, those are just the major steps. Every one of those 65 steps had minor steps in it. It changed the perception of the process, and it really, I think, allowed for me to get them on board. They understood why I was calling 9 meetings, if you will, on this thing. So they didn't like it, but they understood it.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, very good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to part 2, but feel free to throw some more questions in the chat, and we can chat it up with Scott as we go. And we're going to transition to part 2. So Scott covered the CIP planning and BCE portion, did an excellent job. Now I'm going to unpack what we did on the rest of the process, the CIP delivery side of things, and we're calling it our CIP delivery roadmap. So our goals with this, and this was primarily, I got to give a shout out to Zach Monroe. He's on my team, on the project management team, and he's our business process modeling guy. He's learned business process modeling and how to do that in Signavio, and he's teaching Scott and I how to do those things. But our primary goal was really right at the start of the process that we talked about. We're in the beginning. We're starting with CIP delivery. We just want to document our current conditions. So that was really our goal with that portion, is to document our CIP delivery process, in this business process model, the BPMN format. And then secondarily, and this is of equal importance to us, is we want to use this model, as Scott said. We don't just want it to sit on a shelf. We don't want it to just look pretty. We want to use it for communication and training with our KC Water engineering and project management staff. So that's kind of our starting point. And then eventually, once we get this thing documented, we're going to take it through the full methodology and begin to identify improvements, which actually we already have. Just by documenting our as-is process, we're identifying places we can improve. And in some ways, if we got some quick hit things, we're already adapting the process as we move along. So when you look at this overall process, don't think of it, a very structured, linear thing. It can be, but it's also kind of an organic thing that as you're doing this as-is modeling, you start to actually make improvements as you go. So also our longer term effort, and this is where we kind of came up with the roadmap thing, is we want to establish a quote unquote roadmap for our CIP delivery process. And as part of that, establish a common language for how we do CIP delivery. One of the things we found out is that some people are using, like, everybody has a picture in their head of how the process works, but until you get it down on paper, everybody's got something different in their head, right? And you get into these meetings and they might be using the same words, but they're using different dictionaries. And so you start getting into all these arguments about things because they think one thing means another thing. So one of the real benefits of this effort has been to come to a common language, or at least a common framework, to have these conversations about how CIP delivery works here. And so that's kind of helped us to just have better conversations. And then kind of related to that is we want to reduce the risk of people just getting lost. Again, back to that map analogy. We want to avoid them getting lost navigating the project delivery process here. And then finally, just get some consistency in how the process works, and that it's happening the same for the most part from project to project. Okay, so what did we do? So what did we actually do? Well, as Scott mentioned earlier, you also saw this on Jason's slide. We started with the year one business process model template. So the CIP planning and delivery template that was developed by the utility partners, many of the folks here on the line, of kind of this is typically how the process works. We use that as our starting point and said, okay, well, now how do we want to edit this to make it, make it look like what we actually do here at KC Water? So Zach Monroe and I spent a lot of time editing. I'll go back to that last slide. We went back through and edited, each of these stages. Each of these stages have detailed process models built out underneath them. We reviewed each one of those, and we actually went to our schedule. Like Scott said, we have a template for our CIP delivery schedule. We went to our work breakdown structure and identified how does this industry-wide template match up with what we see as our process, and started to build our own detailed business process model adapted from this. So great to have a starting point on this, just to get started. And then we went out to our stakeholders. So I want to give a shout out to Kathleen and Getachew at DC Water. They talked about how they went out and had meetings with the stakeholders, and Jason kind of mentioned this too, is you don't really know how the process works till you actually talk to the people who actually do it every day. And so we took these draft models and started presenting them to our engineering staff, our project managers, and just basically said, hey, just tell us, what are we missing? How does this actually work? We think we've got it, 75% of the way there, but what do we need to change? So we had a lot of meetings. We had 11 meetings with 10 different people, managers, our chief engineering officer, and our senior contract administrator too. as well. And we had a variety of different levels. We had these folks over here on the left, our newest, youngest, brightest project managers coming into our organization. Some of them we met with maybe 2 to 3 weeks after they started on the job. Just, hey, we want to show you this, and really used it kind of as a teaching tool. We said, this isn't perfect, so don't hold us to this, but at least let us kind of talk you through it. This is generally how project delivery works. And we're working on developing this, to be a tool for folks like you. And we said, well, what questions do you have? And they asked a lot of really good questions that helped us to identify where we needed to update the process and make it more detailed. Then we also met with some experienced folks, this 10 to 20 year level. These guys here in the middle, they actually have started with us within the last 6 months. So they're new to KC Water, but they've been managing projects in other organizations, even other industries for a long time. So this guy, Isaac, right here on the left, he came to us from a consulting company. He's got about 10 years of experience in the gas industry. So he's trying to figure out, how do we deliver projects here at KC Water? This guy in the middle actually worked for other municipalities for the last 15 to 20 years. And then this guy actually was a director for City of Liberty, came over to us, and now he's our Smart Sewer Program division head. So sat down with these guys, and it was a whole nother conversation, right? They asked some really, really good questions that helped us kind of get clear about, like, how we actually do it here at KC Water. So we took their feedback, updated our model, sat down with our chief engineer. He's been here at the city for 20 years. He was actually in the public works department. He's somewhat new to KC Water, but he's very familiar with project delivery processes here at the city. So he did some red lines, marked it up. We took his feedback. And then we sat down with our veteran guys. So now these meetings were really awesome. We sat down with these guys, went through every detailed process model. This guy on the left is Kerry Thomas. He's in our water distribution group. And then Morris Ross on the right is facilities project manager. They've been managing projects here at KC Water for about 10 to 20 years. We were kind of looking for generally, how does this resonate with you? What do you think? Is this helpful? The feedback was, yes, this is really good. They're like, wow, we need this. We need to get this out to people. We need this thing. So they were really bought in right from the get-go. And Zach and I spent time in MS Teams meetings, really walking through every step of the process. And again, identifying what's missing and editing the boxes and getting things lined out. One of the areas that is really challenging here, and I'm sure it's true of other utilities, I've heard it before, is the procurement process. So procuring contract services, whether that be design professionals, consultants, or bidding phase contractors. So we really that's where we chose to focus our energy. These two guys right here said, you know what, that's a priority. If you can get that one figured out in that area, that's our stage 3 or 3A before we go into design, that'd be a big win. So we decided to go deeper into that particular stage and really get it built out as best we can. So we met with our senior contract administrator because she knows the process from a contract administrative standpoint on how to get things through the system. And she gave us, again, some really good feedback on what was missing, and we added that to the process. All right, so I really wanted to spend some time with this because it's not necessarily about the flow chart, so to speak. I mean, those are important, but that's just to help frame the conversation. It's really the richness and the conversations you're having with people around these processes that really drive innovation. All right, so again, here's what we started with. This is the collapsed model. And then I just wanted to show you a picture of this is what it looked like after we got through the whole thing. So generally goes through the same steps, but we've reformatted things. We've adapted it to our specific context. So just to zoom in, this is the top half, and we put it into rows to kind of break up the major phases of the CIP planning and delivery. So this was the one Scott showed. So this is what Scott talked about, the CIP planning steps. This next one is the design phase. So this is the design phase services, procurement as well as pre-design and design. And then this bottom half is the last part, which is the bid phase, getting a contractor on board, and then the construction phase and closeout. All right, so here's kind of wrapping things up here. I've said a lot, but what did we learn? So again, like I said earlier, we learned that these business process models, they're like a map. They help us to quickly see where we are in the project life cycle, help us see where we're going, and then determine how to get there. So that's one of the things we learned from just, again, these conversations with the stakeholders. Again, that comment of, gosh, it's so easy to get lost in our processes. We really want these process models to be a place where people can use like a map to figure out how they get from point A to point B. And then the second point we learned from our stakeholders is they want more access. They want these things. They want to be able to get to them. They want to be able to easily find, these things to be able to refer to as they're going through project delivery. So where do we go from here? That's, for the future, that's kind of defining where we're going next. This is a picture of the detailed procurement stage for our design professional contracting. As I mentioned, we've built this out in detail, and we want to make this more available for our project managers so they can actually use it. So what we've done is we've added some things. Some of these things are just formatting things and just a way to organize it, but we broke it into 3 columns. You've got scope development, RFQP, and advertisement and selection. We go through a selection process here, and then a contracting phase where we actually execute the process. So it's kind of a way to organize this so a new project manager can look at it and see, oh, these 10 steps over here on the left are project scope development. So they don't get lost in the chart. And then the next thing we've done is, and again, shout out to Zach Monroe. We're putting together a concept. We've drafted a SharePoint site as a way to really make this more available for our project managers. So this is just a snapshot. It's a little blurry of what it looks like. And we're calling it our Casey Water Project Management Office. And on this front page, we're putting this roadmap, and you can just see a little picture of it. So they can go in and they can click on this, and it's going to pull up a PDF. And these PDFs have hyperlinks built into them. So it'll pull up a PDF of this file. You can go in, you can click on this box for procure services, design professional contracting, and it'll take you to the detailed, and again, this is just a PDF, a detailed version of this process model for procurement. And then we're taking it another step further. You can click on, these major boxes or even these small boxes, and they're hyperlinked. We want to create a folder structure. And so you can see we've got develop project scope. You can go into that folder and then find examples, templates, checklists related to how do you develop a project scope for a project. So that's kind of where we're going next in order to, again, accomplish that goal of making it more accessible for our folks on the ground level. All right, that's all I had. And any questions? All right, I see a couple hands raised. Jeff from Vancouver, I don't know if you still had your hand up from last time. Go ahead if you got a question.
No, sorry about that. I just left it up from last time. Sorry, Dan.
All right. Well, Jenny raised her virtual hand this time. Go ahead.
Thanks, Dan. My question actually was just at the end. You were talking about that Teams integration. I'm sorry if I missed that, but is that integrated with Signavio, or are you exporting as a PDF and then adding to Teams?
That's a great question. We actually evaluated that. We were looking at the tools in Signavio, and Signavio does have the ability to do some hyperlinking and those kinds of things. But again, in order to make it kind of more simple and accessible to our project managers, we're exporting it out into a PDF, and then we're putting the hyperlinks in the PDF file. And so, yeah, we learned from that. It's not too difficult to update those, but anytime you make a change, you got to update all those hyperlinks. So we're trying to be, we know this. So Zach and I are both talking about, okay, let's make sure we get this thing to like 90 to 95% there before we go to all that work of creating the, the file structure and all of that. But even with that, he's like, you can go through and in about an hour, you can update those hyperlinks. So it's not over the top difficult, but yeah, it's a great question. We checked into that. All right, any other questions?
Mike Barnett had a question, Dan, but we probably also need to move.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yes, we will share these tools. And yeah, I know Scott's going to share those tools as well, because we felt like that was one of the most beneficial parts of participating in this, is sharing these artifacts and being able to grab those and adapt them and share them across utilities. So definitely. All right. Well, feel free to type in more questions in the chat. We're going to jump now. Just talk about some feedback about where do we go from here and what do you guys want to do next? So go ahead, Chilo.
Thank you, Dan. These presentations today were really excellent. Everybody, great job. Really wonderful to see. I put in the chat line a link to a survey in SurveyMonkey that we're trying to gauge a level of interest that people would have for topics and things for us to work on next year. And I hope it's not going to take too long to fill it out. If you think you need to spend some time thinking about it, that'd be great as well. But we'll share this survey with the other teams as well, the ones that are working on asset management and the risk and the people side and all that, to get a sense for how do we structure the work so it's the most, that it best meets the needs of the utility partners. So we have just about 10 minutes left, but I think it'll be probably easier if people take time and answer the survey. Maybe originally I planned that we would kind of do it all online and see if we can kind of nudge people through answering the questions. But to use our time in the best way, the link is there. If you need any further information, you can send me an email and I'll figure out how to resolve it. But I think the most valuable part of this thing today was the sharing between the utilities, and I mean it's pretty amazing what you guys are accomplishing over there in Kansas City. I got to see what kind of prescriptions had to be written out to get this much work done in a year.
Necessity is the mother of invention, Cello.
But it's very much appreciated. So I think we don't quite have time for everybody to do the survey now, but maybe we can give a few minutes back to people and encourage them to do the survey, because it will really help us shape what we do next year.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, everybody take some time, fill out those surveys. I will gather up some PDFs of the slides, and then we had the video for both sessions are recorded. I'll push those videos out as well. And then again, you've got folks' email addresses, phone numbers. Don't hesitate to reach out. And then too, I'll follow up with the core team with Cello and Scott and Getachew, and we'll talk about kind of additional any kind of loose ends that we might need to close up as a group. But this was just a great way to I think kind of close out our year together in this group, and we've drafted our case studies, so I think there's still a little bit more work to do to finish those up in final form. But yeah, just want to say great work to everybody, and really enjoyed this. So thank you.
Hey, Dan, Kathleen had a question that's in the chat that is kind of relevant, and you brought it up. Both you and Scott brought up that you're doing things virtually, and she's asking, is the virtual making of your CIP development and et cetera more efficient, or what are the downsides or pluses to doing it that way?
I could probably speak to some of that. I think in general, when you're talking about it's sort of a mixed bag, Kathleen. That's how I would describe it, right? In some ways, it was nice because materials and forms and all that, right? People were used to working in a virtual environment, so I could point them to a form, and because everybody was on their computer all the time, it was just like, go grab the form, and if that makes sense. So that was actually pretty efficient. As it relates to like planning things, right? Like at the very first part of the process that I mentioned today, when it was just Dan, even if it was just Dan and Zach and Lisa and I, it would have been great to be in a room together to kind of storyboard out some of those ideas and drop. I mean, I essentially had to do it. I kind of did all the documentation work, and then I would, feed it to them via, especially at that time, we weren't really sure how to use Teams so great. We were using Teams, but very, 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 so a lot of it was emails passing back and forth, that type thing. So from a strategic planning perspective, not more efficient. From a kind of task-oriented level, in some ways it was more efficient. One thing I'll mention on that was it's really interesting the nature of the conversations in the virtual space, right? So we have the executive management team of our CIP on these calls, and I noticed one thing that I found probably made me think maybe we should do this virtual every year. They were much more kind to one another and much less talking over one another. There was a lot less. There's been past years when it gets to that meeting where the fisticuffs come out almost, right? And they talk over each other and they're boorish and all that. And we didn't have that really at all this year. It was actually it was very
so thank
civil.
goodness for the mute button, huh?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I'm sure they were all looking for the emoji of the middle finger to me a couple of times, but I didn't really care because I could sort of shut them down. I'm sorry, I have one thought on this. The key to me of the whole thing was the process, right? We had built out this process in such a way that it really took a lot of the stuff that was controversial or unorganized. The reason we had a lot of controversy was because of disorganization before, right? So having this model, it kind of just flowed really nicely, which was relieving and also helpful. So long answer, but hopefully that helps you.
It's interesting. I mean, I think maybe one thing to think of for the WISE thing is kind of how do you use Teams and what kind of hybrid are we going to be in next year? Or before we forget how this year went.
Yeah. Well, I was going to actually ask Cello to maybe comment on, I think half or so, or maybe more, were in Portland for almost a week-long workshop, and we all felt we got tons out of that being in person, but we've gone almost exactly a year without being together and, on the project overall. And maybe Cello wants to just mention what the prospects are going forward.
Well, before that, I see Jason has his hand up, so I want to give him a chance to ask.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I don't know if this is exactly your question, Kathleen, but my experience, at least within Metro Vancouver, we were very paper-based before, and there was this expectation to like print off like every single report, and then all the meetings would just be bogged down with these like senior level managers reviewing every data like line by line by line. And I'm like, I think you're being paid way too much to do this. So I think the nature of it moving into online, nobody gets the handout anymore. The very first few meetings, there were talk about, oh, what if we mail it to their houses? And I'm like, that's like, let's not do that. Let's just have the PowerPoint, and it really forces us to condense and like clarify our message, and it forces us to be like okay, no, what decision actually needs to be made in this meeting? And, you know, we can't just review things line by line. And I think that helped a lot.
Yeah. Hey, if I could add one other point, that's exactly what Jason said. I think I mentioned that at a glance document, right? I'd say 90% of our conversations were at the at a glance level with senior management, right? Because of the same issue. If they went into the BCE, then they were literally dissecting every half a sentence, you know, and it was like, if that's one of the reasons we built it, it was like, let's just build it. Here's the pertinent information. If you need more, you can go get it in the BCE. If you don't, sweet, we can move on. So absolutely, good point.
Well, that's really great. And as far as whys, we will, I see Scott has the sun shining behind him, so it seems like he's kind of transcending into a whole different universe.
It's like he's like emerging from heaven. He's an angel sent to us from wise heaven.
I'm almost afraid to speak, you know, but we will this survey, if you could please, it will help us shape whys in such a form that it really provides the maximum value to things we have to do on the ground. So I'm going to stop recording right now just to make sure that I don't forget. And